Hand man, at least for a while. Budget Director Mick Mulvaney is taking on the job of Chief of Staff on an acting basis for now. Correspondent Kevin Cork has details tonight from the North Lawn of the White House. Good evening, Kevin.
Evening, Brett. By tapping Mick Mulvaney, the president does a couple of things. Number one, he takes on a person who has obviously distinguished himself in a couple of other opportunities within the administration, both over at CFFP and also over at OMB. But it's also important to point this out. Mulvaney is a bit of a fiscal hawk, and that could loom very important ahead of a potential partial government shutdown. Now, that choice obviously also comes today, Brett, on a day in which the president's former fixer, Michael Cohen, his former attorney, blamed the president for a series of bad choices.
Nothing at the Trump Organization was ever done unless it was run through Mr. Trump. He directed me to make the payments.
In his first interview since being sentenced to 3 years in prison, President Trump's former fixer, attorney Michael Cohen, defiantly proclaimed this morning that then-candidate Donald Trump encouraged him to break the law during the 2016 campaign.
I'm angry at myself because I knew what I was doing was wrong.
Cohen alleges that Mr. Trump directed him to facilitate hush payments to two women who claimed they'd had affairs with Trump years before he was a candidate for office, something Trump has repeatedly denied. Cohen now faces time behind bars for those payments, as well as tax evasion, misleading banks, and lying to Congress. Today, White House officials ridiculed Cohen's version of the facts.
For the media to give credence to a convicted criminal who has lied on multiple occasions and self-admitted doing just that is quite frankly laughable.
Still, the president's recollection of the payments themselves has shifted over time. In April, he said this aboard Air Force One.
Did you know about the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels? Then why did Michael Cohen make this if there was no truth or allegation?
You have to ask Michael Cohen. Michael's my attorney, and you'll have to ask Michael.
Do you know where he got the money to make that payment?
No, I don't know.
Now, though, he admits he was aware of the payment to Daniels, but said they were not uncommon for celebrities eager to tamp down stories in order to protect their families. A perspective drawn into sharp focus this week when the parent company of the National Enquirer, AMI, struck a non-prosecution deal with authorities in New York by admitting to funneling hush money in cooperation with a member of the Trump camp to keep damaging stories from being made public during the 2016 race. Legal experts say there's a wide gulf between knowledge of payments and intent to unlawfully aid a campaign.
Reasonable people could disagree about whether it's wrong to pay hush money to somebody to stop them from disclosing alleged impropriety sexually. Reasonable people could say that's wrong or that's right. It's not illegal.
Not illegal, says Alan Dershowitz. By the way, Brett, just a moment ago, we have been monitoring Twitter, and we got this from Mick Mulvaney. He says, "This is a tremendous honor. I look forward to working with the president and the entire team. It's going to be a great 2019. So another day and another hat for Mick Mulvaney, Brett.
More on this with the panel. Kevin, thanks. The special counsel's office is on offense tonight. It's pushing back hard at the accusation that the FBI acted improperly in an interview with former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. A judge had ordered the special counsel to respond to the charge by this afternoon, and it did so forcefully. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Harrods has details tonight. Good evening, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Brett. According to the special counsel filing, the president's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, as a seasoned military officer who dealt regularly with the Bureau, knew he should not lie to federal agents, and Mueller's office alleged the lies began weeks before the meeting with the FBI.
During Flynn's January 2017 interview about his conversation with the Russian ambassador, the special counsel told the court, quote, the FBI agents gave the defendant multiple opportunities to correct his false statements by revisiting key questions, but the defendant never corrected his false statements. The filing also includes a memo that appears to be written by then FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, who set up the White House interview. According to the memo, Flynn explained that, quote, he had been trying to build relationships with the Russians. Although parts are heavily redacted, the memo suggests Flynn knew any conversations with the Russian ambassador were monitored by U.S. intelligence. Quote, he then stated that I probably knew what was said. Though Deputy Director McCabe seemed to discourage Flynn from having a lawyer present for the short notice interview and was not warned any false statements could be prosecuted, the special counsel said, quote, the circumstances of the defendant's interview are not mitigating. And, quote, assuming the defendant continues to accept responsibility for his actions, Mueller's team wants the guilty plea to stand with a minimal sentence. Federal Judge Emmett Sullivan gave the special counsel and Flynn's legal team less than 48 hours to file the records, which include an interview of Peter Strzok, one of 2 agents to question Flynn. This record is heavily redacted, summarizing Strzok's special counsel interview about Flynn 7 months later. He described Flynn as having a, quote, very sure demeanor and did not give any indicators of deception. Flynn struck Strzok as bright, but not profoundly sophisticated.
So help me God.
In a separate development, the Presidential Inaugural Committee denied any knowledge of a pending federal investigation after media reports that the New York U.S. Attorney may be investigating foreign contributions to allegedly buy, access, or influence the new administration. The Wall Street Journal reported that the investigation grew out of raids on Michael Cohen, the president's former lawyer and fixer who pled guilty this week to multiple federal charges. The paper reported that FBI agents seized recordings between Cohen and an advisor to Melania Trump, voicing concern over inaugural committee spending.
That doesn't have anything to do with the president or the first lady. The biggest thing the president did in his engagement in the inauguration was to come here and raise his hand and take the oath of office.
Democrats said the reported inaugural investigation is another damaging revelation surrounding the Trump campaign and the Trump administration. Next week promises more major developments. Monday, former FBI Director James Comey will face House investigators for a second time, and Flynn is still on deck to be sentenced, on Tuesday. Brett.
You need a whiteboard or a flow chart
you
or something.
need more than that.
Sorry, Captain. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The U.S. military is under attack from China. It is not anything you can see, but it's extremely dangerous and destructive nonetheless. State Department correspondent Rich Edson tells us what's happening with this new cyber attack.
Chinese hackers are targeting and stealing sensitive, classified military secrets from Navy contractors, prompting a government review of American cyber vulnerabilities. That's according to a memo from Secretary of the Navy Richard Spencer, obtained by the Wall Street Journal. It says, quote, attacks on our networks are not new, but attempts to steal critical information are increasing in both severity and sophistication. We must act decisively to fully understand both the nature of these attacks and how to prevent further loss of vital military information. The Wall Street Journal reports Chinese hackers take a variety of information, from ship maintenance data to plans on a supersonic anti-ship missile. They've also tried to steal from universities that develop advanced military technology.
Lots of complicated issues going on with China today all around the world. And we work on each of those to get good outcomes for the people of the United States of America and respecting the rule of law.
Last year, the Navy awarded the Harris Corporation a $765 million contract for tactical radios. Harris's CEO says hackers have also targeted his company.
It's no secret that China is very, very good at cyber espionage. They're stealing our trade secrets, our product capabilities, and we've got to defend against that.
In a statement, the Navy says the Secretary's decision to initiate a review shows how seriously it takes cybersecurity, especially in an era of renewed great power competition. Brett?
Rich Edson at the State Department. Rich, thanks. The U.S. and Canada began high-stakes talks today amid an escalating dispute with China over the arrest of a top Chinese telecom executive. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Defense Secretary Jim Mattis were meeting their Canadian counterparts today. Huawei Chief Financial Officer Meng Wanzhou is accused of misleading banks about the company's business dealings in Iran. China has detained 2 Canadians in apparent retaliation. We are just 1 week away from the possible government shutdown, at least partial shutdown. The main sticking point continues to be the border wall. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live tonight on Capitol Hill with the latest. Good evening, Mike.
Brett, good evening. It's not entirely clear how they get out of this jam. One idea is passing a 2-week extension to fund the government until after the holidays to pick up the fight at that point. Frustration is growing among some key Senate Republicans toward Democrats.
It makes no sense. They have no border security plan. Months ago, they supported $25 billion in border security funding. Right. Now, they support less than a fifth of that. This is a massive cut in border security funding that the Democrats are now proposing.
President Trump sounds like he might be looking for a way out, tweeting, "Let's not do a shutdown, Democrats. Do what's right for the American people." The president was very tough with the top congressional Democrats in the Oval Office this week, demanding significant funding for his border wall. Senator Schumer and Leader Pelosi offered him a take-it-or-leave-it type deal and sounded delighted that the president would accept blame for a partial government shutdown. And feeling like they have leverage, now they don't sound willing to budge.
Fortunate that the president has decided that he would shut down government. That's a drastic thing for him to do, especially as we leave the Congress for the holidays, because that means it would be shut down for a while.
The president's position on the wall is totally contradictory, ill-informed, and frankly, irresponsible. A Trump temper tantrum and shutdown threat isn't going to change any minds here in Congress.
But it's not entirely clear what Mr. Trump is willing to accept.
Whether you agree or disagree with him, if I were playing poker with him right now and didn't have the cards, I'd fold.
And that is why some folks are worried about a partial government shutdown right before Christmas. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thanks. Arizona's governor says Senator John Kyle will resign at the end of the year. Kyle was appointed to the seat in September following the death of John McCain. Kyle's departure will create another vacancy that Republican governor dug of John McCain's term. Up next, outrage over the death of a 7-year-old migrant girl in U.S. custody at the border. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox Connecticut, as students at Sandy Hook Elementary School are sent home for the day after a bomb threat forced the evacuation of their new building. It happened on the 6th anniversary of the massacre that killed 20 first graders and 6 educators. Moments of silence were observed Friday morning in memory of the victims. Fox 31, our affiliate in Denver, as Colorado police search the property of a missing woman's fiance. As we reported earlier this week, 29-year-old Kelsey Barrett was last seen 3 weeks ago. Police have not released any information about the purpose of today's search. The fiance has not been named yet as a suspect in Barrett's disappearance. And this is a live look at a foggy San Francisco from Fox 2, our affiliate. The big story there tonight, Facebook says a software bug may have allowed third-party apps to access photos of almost 7 million Facebook users. That includes images not posted on timelines or not fully uploaded. The breach occurred in September. Facebook has apologized. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.
To killing a detainee during an interview with Fox News' Bret Baier in October 2016.
Did you kill the Taliban bomb maker?
Yes. Major Matthew Goldstein was a U.S. Special Forces soldier attached to a Marine unit that faced heavy fighting in the battle for Marja in February 2010. He later acknowledged during a polygraph when applying for a job at the CIA that he had killed an alleged Taliban member who they suspected of planting a bomb that killed 2 Marines, Sergeant Jeremy McQuarrie and Lance Corporal Larry Johnson.
You willingly offered up these details at the CIA, right?
That's correct.
And that's where it all started.
Pretty much.
According to a senior defense official, Goldstein told the CIA he killed the Afghan off base, placed his body into a pit and burned it. But reached by telephone, Goldstein told Fox News, quote, "I made a lawful engagement of a known enemy combatant on the battlefield." He says the rules of engagement were so strict at the time that they were only allowed to detain and process Afghans for drug crimes. Goldstein says following the suspected Afghan bomb maker's release, he tracked him down and killed him. Goldstein said he believed that letting go of the insurgent meant the man could later target Afghans who were helping U.S. troops.
You can construe it as a law enforcement mindset. There's limits on how long you can hold guys.
So we would pull these guys out. We'd say, clearly these are enemy combatants. These are Taliban. These are bad dudes. We'd pull them out, but we wouldn't have any place to hold them. So eventually we'd let them back, and they would cause terror to the community again.
A senior U.S. defense official confirmed to Fox News the Army's Criminal Investigation Command reopened the investigation based on new evidence that includes the Green Berets' public statements. The Defense Department's Inspector General investigated the Army's original handling of the case, which found not enough evidence to prosecute Goldstein after a 6-day hearing. California Congressman Duncan Hunter, a former Marine who served in Iraq, has championed Goldstein's case. He wrote the following letter to Army Chief General Mark Milley, quote, "Goldstein is an American hero, a true warrior, in fact. Why the Army is hell-bent on destroying a combat hero's career is truly astonishing. I'm confident that Army CID has more important things to do than investigate Goldstein again, and you both have the ability to fix this stupidity."
What is it like going from war hero to accused war criminal? Are you angry?
No. It has been incredibly painful, very difficult. Over the last year of these years, everyone who served with me stood by me. And so it's over, and it's time to move on.
Sources tell me that when Goldstein admitted killing a man in cold blood on television, the Army investigators had no choice but to reopen the case. Major Goldstein claims that strict rules of engagement forced him to release the alleged Taliban bomb maker who had been fingered by an Afghan informant, and that he had no choice to act as he did. But those to whom I have spoken here at the Pentagon say he did have a choice, and now Major Matthew Goldstein has been charged with premeditated murder and could face the death penalty. Brett?
Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. Up next, the Inspector General is looking into the death of a 7-year-old migrant girl in U.S. custody at the border. We will take you there, bringing that story. First, beyond our borders tonight, the Christmas market in Strasbourg, France has reopened amid tight security. Yesterday, the gunman suspected of attacking the market earlier this week was fatally shot by police. Also today, Italy's premier says an Italian journalist wounded in that attack has died, becoming the 4th fatality. Israeli forces arrested dozens of Hamas activists in the West Bank overnight. The Israeli army is intensifying a crackdown in response to a pair of deadly shootings believed to have been carried out by Hamas militants. And a group of small islands and countries said to be particularly vulnerable to climate change is threatening to block agreement at UN climate talks unless its demands are met. The former president of the Maldives says the current draft agreement being discussed in Poland does not reflect the reality faced by countries on the front line of climate change. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back. Trying to determine tonight what killed a 7-year-old migrant girl who was picked up along the U.S.-Mexico border. An autopsy has been scheduled. Late today, the Homeland Security Department Inspector General's office announced it will investigate. The girl's death is provoking new concerns about the president's immigration policy at the border. Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt has the story from Los Angeles.
It's heart-wrenching.
Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen says the 7-year-old Guatemalan girl was in a group of 163 people who had illegally crossed the border from Mexico into the U.S. According to a timeline provided by Customs and Border Protection officials, the group was found by a team of 4 CBP agents at 9:15 p.m. on December 6th and held at a sparse forward operating base near the border while being interviewed. Officials say the group had access to water, food and restrooms. Nearly 8 hours later, around 5 a.m. on the 7th, the girl, who had, according to CBP officials, shown no signs of illness, was put on a CBP bus for the 95-mile journey to the Lordsburg processing station in New Mexico. At that point, the girl's father told agents his daughter was sick and vomiting. They radioed ahead, and when the bus arrived at Lordsburg at 6:30 a.m., emergency medical personnel began treating the girl. She was not breathing and and was revived twice. At 7:45 a.m., she was transported by air ambulance to a hospital in El Paso, Texas. She died there just after midnight on December 8th, having suffered brain swelling and liver failure.
This is just a very sad example of the dangers of this journey. This family chose to cross illegally.
Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein said in a statement the death was heartbreaking and unacceptable, and said the U.S. owes migrants, quote, compassionate, humane treatment. Democrats also want to know whether the CBP commissioner was aware of the 7-year-old girl's death when he testified before the Senate on Tuesday, and if he was, why he did not bring it up. Brett?
Jonathan, thank you. Immigration politics are at the heart of a bizarre situation in Seattle tonight. It involves a law school depriving its students of real-world work experience and keeping them from helping other people. Correspondent Dan Springer tells us about it.
Following a single complaint from student Alex Romero and an online petition signed by several hundred others, Seattle University's law school suspended its externship program with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Every nation enforces their immigration laws, and for those students, I think they've been cheated.
Citing the school's, quote, special responsibility to be peacemakers, the law school's Dean Annette Clark defended the decision, arguing the school should, quote, assist those who are suffering due to the unjust operation of our legal system, laws, and their enforcement.
I think it's a good decision, and it reflects CLU's views in a positive way.
Former ICE director and Fox News contributor Thomas Holman calls the move misguided.
Again, it's not all about administrative immigration, which I know is very controversial, very emotional, but they work on a lot of national security, terrorism investigations. They do a lot of work surrounding the removal and deportation of known and suspected terrorists.
ICE's legal team includes 1,200 lawyers and 300 support staff in 70 U.S. cities. Most are in front of immigration judges in facilities like the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma. Law school students routinely help lower the case backload. ICE's principal legal advisor tells Fox News it's disheartening that an institution dedicated to teaching the laws of this country and whose core values include justice and diversity would prevent its students from gaining valuable professional experience. National law school rankings suggest Seattle U could use all the work-study programs it could get. It ranks near the bottom of several lists when it comes to graduates passing the bar the first time and actually working as a lawyer. The law school student who made the complaint about ICE and the university declined our request for an interview. Brett?
Dan Springer in Seattle. Dan, thanks. The Education Department says it will start forgiving federal loans for 15,000 former students whose colleges closed before they could graduate. Department officials say the $150 million in loans will automatically be wiped clean. The loans are being forgiven under an Obama-era rule that recently took effect after a federal judge ruled Education Secretary Betsy DeVos was unlawfully delaying it. Shares of Johnson & Johnson plunged 10.4% today after Reuters reported the company has known since the 1970s its talc baby powder sometimes contained asbestos. The decline wiped off about $24 billion from the company's market capitalization and made the stock the biggest drag on the Dow Jones Industrial Average and S&P 500 indices. The company is denying that it hid information and says it will appeal recent verdicts against it. But it was another big day of losses on Wall Street. The Dow cratered 497 to its lowest close since May and entered correction territory. The S&P 500 fell 51. The Nasdaq dropped 160. For the week, the Dow lost 1.25 percentage points. The S&P 500 was down 1.25. The Nasdaq fell almost a point. All three indices are off to the worst start in December since 1980. Wisconsin Republican Governor Scott Walker has signed a sweeping package of Republican-written legislation restricting early voting and taking authority away from the incoming Democratic governor and attorney general. Walker signed the bills just 24 days before he leaves office after his midterm election defeat by Tony Evers. Critics call the move a power grab that will stain Walker's legacy, a big controversy in Wisconsin. Up next, the panel on a new acting chief of staff at the White House, the special counsel's response to accusations of improperly interviewing the president's former national security advisor, and the president's former attorney, Michael Cohen, speaks out. We'll fit it all in next. president tweeting today, I'm pleased to announce that Mick Mulvaney, Director of Office of Management and Budget, will be named acting White House Chief of Staff, replacing General John Kelly, who has served our country with distinction. Mick has done an outstanding job while in the administration. I look forward to working with him in this new capacity as we continue to make America great again. John will be staying until the end of the year. He is a great patriot, and I want to personally thank him for his service. Mulvaney called it a tremendous honor. Earlier in May, talking to the Weekly Standard, the late Weekly Standard that closed its doors today, said this is not about being chief of staff. It's not a job you turn down. The president doesn't walk in and ask you if you want to be chief of staff. The president walks in and says, you are the next chief of staff, and you say yes. You can't do it for more than 12 to 18 months. Nobody does. The bad news is that as soon as he says you are now the chief of staff, it means you're on your way out, just inevitably. I'd take it. I think I'd be pretty good at it, but I don't think it's come to that. Well, now it has. It's ladies' night on the panel. Let's bring in our panel. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist, Susan Page, Washington bureau chief at USA Today, and national security analyst Morgan Ortagus. Susan, Mulvaney seems pretty well positioned for something like this. If you're looking for someone who is plugged in politically and knows kind of where the bodies are buried on Capitol Hill.
And also knows how to work with President Trump, because he's done that successfully. As budget director, he gave him an additional job over at the Consumer Safety, whatever it is, Consumer Protection Agency. So that's all good, but it is a killer job. It's a killer job in any administration. It is double so in the Trump administration because of all the things that come at you. And I think it's interesting that he's designated as acting. Does that tell us that that was something he said to Trump? I don't want to do this for the long term. I'll just fill in for a time.
Yeah, and he kind of has it both ways. I mean, he could make his stamp and have the job permanently, and they're saying off, in background that it is White House Chief of Staff, even though it has the acting. And then if things implode or something doesn't work, he says, I was just acting.
Sure, although I think that might happen no matter whether you were called to acting or not.
Yeah.
But when people really liked General Kelly, and I think what they liked about him was that he did bring a lot of stability and order to the White House. And Mick Mulvaney brings that, and also a very established record as a conservative, as someone who everyone recognizes has quite a few conservative positions. So I imagine this will make quite a few people happy.
He was a member of the Freedom Caucus as a congressman, Morgan, and pretty much a budget hawk in Congress. Obviously, he's dealing with a budget proposal that's not as hawkish, perhaps, as he wanted to as a congressional member. But it's interesting that he's coming at a time to White House Chief of Staff when there's this budget battle and whether we're going to have a partial government shutdown or not.
That's a great point, Bret. I think he is a great pick from an economic perspective, if that's the message that the president is going to continue to pound going into 2020. I will say people on the DOD side and the national security side were not thrilled with the budget cuts that he proposed as OMB director. He did back down off those because the president wanted to continue the military spending that Mattis especially has argued for and proposed. So we'll see what happens on the DOD side.
Yeah. All right, let's take a listen to Mike Cohen today talking about the president directing these payments.
He's saying very clearly that he never directed you to do anything wrong. Is that true?
I don't think there's anybody that believes that. First of all, nothing at the Trump organization was ever done unless it was run through Mr. Trump. He directed me to make the payments. He directed me to become involved in these matters. I gave loyalty to someone who truthfully does not deserve loyalty.
Went on to say he doesn't believe that the president's telling the truth about Russia, but we didn't get too many details out of that entire interview.
I think if you have Michael Cohen there to answer any questions you have, you might ask for some specifics. It was all very nebulous, and I think it all is going to depend on what he says specifically. I mean, there are a lot of ways that you can make settlements and sign non-disclosure agreements that are in no way a campaign finance violation. It would require a pretty particular set of circumstances to convince anyone that it actually is a legitimate campaign finance violation. For some reason, he wasn't asked about that. He wasn't asked about the dossier, which had the central piece of it that he was an agent who had gone to Prague and secretly met with Russians. If I had Michael Cohen there to ask him some questions, I might ask him whatever happened to that allegation, and if it's true, and if it's not, what that means about the dossier in general.
We've asked for that interview, and if we get it, you can come on in. Susan, it wasn't asked if Donald Trump had made payments like this in the past, which would have established some kind of something ahead of just the payments ahead of the campaign.
You know who I bet asked all these questions? I bet investigators asked Michael Cohen all these questions. And what you heard in that interview, even without specifics, are three key points are very troubling for President Trump. One, Michael Cohen says he directed these payments. Number two, he knew they were illegal. Number three, it was for the purposes of affecting the campaign.
And you just have to trust Michael Cohen, and then you're fine.
You don't have to trust him. There are credibility problems with Michael Cohen, but he does lay out the three things you need to have be true for this to really be a troubling thing for people.
And the question we don't really know is whether there's backup tapes, other documentation, other interviews, what Mueller has.
Right, and it's important to remember that he's going to jail for financial crimes, really, for tax fraud, for bank fraud. And if you look at what the Southern District said about his credibility, it's very different than what the Mueller team has said and alleged. And I think that it's important to note here that what he has pled to is not litigated in court as it relates to the campaign finance violations. These are things that he pled to, and really, if anything ever affects President Trump, it will have to go before the Congress, a Republican Senate, who I don't think we sort of played this. We did this during the 90s, and it did not end well for them.
Meantime, the special counsel, in a rare disclosure, pushing back on the characterization that somehow the interview of Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor, was handled poorly. In this memo, says nothing about the way the interview was arranged or conducted caused the defendant to make false statements to the FBI on January 24th. The defendant chose to make false statements about his communications with the Russian ambassador weeks before the FBI interview, when he lied about the topic to the media, the incoming vice president, and other members of the presidential transition team. When faced with the FBI's questions on January 24th during an interview that was voluntary and cordial, the defendant repeated the same false statements. The court should reject the defendant's attempt to minimize the seriousness of those false statements to the FBI. While the circumstances of the interview do not present mitigating considerations, assuming the defendant continues to accept responsibility for his actions, his cooperation in military service continued to justify a sentence